My name is Christopher Mbanefo, and the idea is to have a conversation. In the African tradition, we also call it, we shall have a palava, and that is the mutual discovery of who we are, identifying what connects us, inspiring each other, and evolving from the conversation stronger than when we started. I'm going to hand over the mic, let everybody give a quick introduction, and then let the palava start.
Beauty first.
Good afternoon all. Doris, Afrida, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Kwame Biko. I'm originally from Ghana, based in London, and I'm the CEO co-founder of Afresurf. I'm coming from a background in aviation, and some of you may know that aviation has made a commitment to be net zero by 2050, and ultimately what we're trying to do in our business is to position Africa to be a net producer of sustainable fuels. Now, the feedstock for sustainable fuel is waste or residue from agriculture. And at this stage, Africa produces about 500 million tons of unconstrained agricultural residue every single year. Unfortunately, today it's either burnt on the fields, we see this after harvest, it's discarded or really just left to decay. And what we're trying to do is to position Africa to strategically leverage this feedstock to produce biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels to power the energy transition for the future. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm Julian. I'm French. I'm Togolese. I have some blood from Senegal too. I'm an investment banker, and I actually decided to leave this career to create my own investment firm. And my mission is to make it easy for anyone to invest in Africa. For now, just West African countries. And we are doing that with investment strategies so that individuals, professional investors, or family offices can invest in Africa easily, in a secured way, and well diversified. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you. So my name is Celeste Chetgen Fogo. I am Cameroonian, I am Ghanaian, I am Swiss, and I am American. And I own every bit of all of that, and that's what makes me rich. And today I can add Kenya and Rwanda to that journey. Not to steal Christopher's thunder, but I want to start by saying something that Christopher told us at the debriefing session. Where we come from the African continent, we always start by remembering where we came from. And as I'm building electrified fleets in Africa, I want to take you back to 7 generations ago in the late 1800s, when decisions about how we move today, how we move goods, how we move people were made by people who were not us. We were not even in the room. Cities were built to extract raw materials and take them to the ports. Local native people lived in places that had no roads. So when you fast forward today to 7 generations later, what we have is incredibly dense cities, growing cities, a city like Nairobi with over 10 million people, and you are unable to move with cars and vans. So as we're building fleets, we think about what it's going to look like for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and their children in 7 generations. So what we're doing is building a system that allows people who live in those cities to be able to move goods, to move themselves in an efficient, inexpensive manner, thinking about the future generations.
Thank you very much. I will basically pick that up and just expand on that a little bit so that everybody is on the same tree with us, so to speak, the image of the savannah. 7 generations, we are at the intersection point. We are the present. We are living the results of decisions that have been taken by our forefathers up to 7 generations ago. The so-called primitive people, indigenous people, people close to Mother Earth, they think in 7 generations, both in the past into the future. And that is an amazing concept. It shows responsibility. And that indigenous wisdom we all have in Africa. Why? Because we also honor the ancestors. When we open up a new bottle of spirits, the first drop goes to the ancestors. We honor them. We acknowledge the fact that their suffering has resulted in us being able to be here. And when somebody asks, what is the role that each one of us has to play in life? I summarize that by saying we should all strive to become good ancestors, whatever that means. The other thing I just want to mention very, very briefly to trigger your minds is the way you think of yourself is how the universe realizes you. The African continent, I had some conversations with some of you. The African continent in the year 2022, according to NASA satellite data, sequestered over 40 billion tons of CO2. At the current price of the EU ETS here in Europe, that equates to a value contribution to the common good with an economic value of 3.6 trillion euros. I have just stated scientific facts, and I have also stated economic facts. That means sub-Saharan Africa has contributed 3.6 trillion in the year 2022 alone. That figure is not reflected in any GDP. That's a conversation I had with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Why is that not reflected in our GDP? We need to unlock that wealth. That's what I'm working on, amongst others. But the point is, we are the wealthiest continent by far. How do we unlock that wealth into cash flow, enabling us to realize the vision that we should have? That's the question. So I'm going to ask the panelists to share the vision and the impact you want to realize through what you are doing. And then that will lead to the next question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think something my dad always told me is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I want to sit and think about that, particularly as diasporans, because we're given a privileged position that our parents never really had. 140 years ago in Berlin, they divided Africa to the Africa we know today, which has caused, to some extent, some of the challenges we see in Africa. I've been in many meetings over my career, coming from aviation, where people have spoken about the future of aviation and where the energy source is going to come from in the future. And they've spoken about Africa being a feedstock hub, producing the necessary raw materials for what we need for the transition, but not being a place where we can actually process these goods. And ultimately, that's something that we're here to change. Because I'm from Ghana, and my brother Tariq mentioned something just earlier about cocoa. The second largest cocoa producer in the world, and today, you get about 7% of the value of chocolate. Very small. Also one of the largest gold producers in the world. We import back jewelry which is 25 times the value. We can go on and on in East Africa when it comes to coffee. We produce raw coffee beans. import it back in those small capsules, about 100 times more the value. And Africa needs to move from a place of production to processing these goods. Have you ever asked the question of why is it so expensive to travel by flight between two African countries? Ghana, Accra and Lagos, 45-minute flight. Two of the largest capital cities in West Africa. It costs $500 for that 45-minute flight. Typical 45-minute flight in the EU could save you about $30, $40 on a good day. And we've got to ask ourselves, why is this so? How can I trade with my neighbor if I have to pay $500 just to get there? And one of the reasons we're tackling on energy is because it's 40% of the cost of aviation. And our goal is to really transition and make Africa an energy producer of the future. Thank you.
€54 billion each year. It's the amount that is sent by the diaspora to Africa each year. 54 billion euros. And yet, something like 90% of it is not properly invested. It's to help families, for help, for education, for many things. But there isn't any strategies. Since like maybe 15 years, fintechs in Africa, they were addressing this issue. Remittance, so sending money, Western Union, and I'm sure that everyone here knows a lot of services doing that. But I think that this is the end of it. This is the end of this first generation of fintechs doing this remittance, doing this transfer of money. Now we need to think about what are we doing with this money. 54 billion euro each year. For Senegal, which is one of the biggest economies in Africa, this amount represents 10% of the GDP. So we actually need to think about now how do we invest our money and how do we do this together so that we think about these sets generation further, but we have a proper action in them, right? So this is exactly why I created this platform, Mina. We are using technologies, actually we're using blockchain, so that we can all have some little impact on investment over there. We're creating investment strategies so that, let's say my mother, she's a nurse. She doesn't know how to do proper investment. It's not her education, but she has the same heart. Maybe even bigger than me, her in Africa, right? She's born in Dakar and she wants to contribute. And she's working, she's earning her money, right? But we need to create a system so that we can transform this will into real action, and an action that will stand for a long run. And so this is exactly why I really think that it has to be a global movement, kind of, and not just about sending money, not just about helping new initiatives. Sometimes it's just about doing what you're doing, but in another way. Where are your savings right now? Do you have 1,000 euros, 2,000 euros? Where are they right now? Probably they're not in Africa, and they're using in Wall Street or somewhere in already developed countries, right? So that's my point. Today, pension funds, they rather invest in Germany with a 2, 3, 4% interest rate rather than investing in Benin, Ghana, Togo. It would be 8, maybe 9, 10% interest rate. We need to think about what we want to, where we want our money, right? So, yeah, this is the mission for me, and this is how I think that I contribute to this 7th generation further.
So how did I set out to redesign mobility in East Africa to serve not only livelihoods but also human dignity and services? For me, I'd like to frame this to put it in the framework that Christopher illustrated for us. How do we think about ourselves when we think about generations to come and where we come from. I was a lawyer in Switzerland. I literally left the boardrooms of Swiss Re to go lead the startup in Kenya. And a lot of people have asked me, but why? Even in Kenya, people say to me, you seriously left Switzerland to come back to Africa? And I say this a bit tongue-in-cheek because the reason I did this was actually my children. In 2018, as my oldest child was getting ready to go to college, I realized that their trips to Africa from Switzerland, my kids are Swiss-born, were raised, in the opulence that we all know Switzerland offers. And they'd always gone back home to visit my parents and also spent, time in nice hotels, in nice holidays. And before they went off to college, it just dawned on me that I really needed them to make Africa their own before they go off, in this case, to the U.S., to get somebody else to define Africa for them. And so I decided to go on a 1-month trip to West Africa in the Gulf of Guinea. We decided to drive from Benin, from Cotonou, through the country of Benin, and then through Togo and Ghana, and end up in Ivory Coast. And the only concession to luxury that I had agreed to was that we would have a car and a driver. Everything else was going to be we're just going to rough it out. And after 2 days in Cotonou, my youngest said to me, "Mom, I don't like Africa. I don't like this. Why are you doing this to us?" And I said, "What don't you like about it?" "I don't like anything about it. There's too much traffic. It stinks. There's too many people. There's litter." And I was horrified because I had brought them, they'd been to so many African countries. So I said to them, both of them, I said, "We have 1 month and you guys are going to need to I can't have you complain all day. So what we're going to do is everyone's going to take a notebook and we're all going to observe what we see and we're going to try to find solutions, because 1.4 billion people in Africa have to put up with all of the things that you said. Now, you have had the privilege of going to good schools in Switzerland, and so since you know it all, figure it out." And so we agreed that we were going to do that. And a month later, my kids came up with 4 business plans. One of them was about recycling. They were born in Switzerland, and recycling is part of their DNA. So that was one possibility. One of them was internet connection. You can imagine when they got to the 1 or 2 star hostels that I had picked, internet was not what they were used to, and it buffered, and they could not get onto their shows, and so they were very unhappy. And then one of them was actually e-mobility, because one of my kids has asthma and said to me, "I don't understand why people can't use e-bikes." And I said, "Well, remember, in most of the hotels we went to, there were power outages." And they said, and they really went and did research and then figured out how we could solve that problem too. And so I chose e-mobility not because it was the biggest problem, but because those of us who live in comfortable spaces that we didn't build have to ask ourselves, what are we going to tell our children? What are we going to tell our children about what we did? So asking myself that question, I left my cushy job, I left Swiss Re, and I set out to go back to Africa to build something that my grandkids, my great-grandkids can be proud of. And that is what I do for future generations.
To know where you are, you need to know where you came from. To know where you're going, you need to know where you are. I'm saying this Because when we as Africans introduce ourselves, and we just witness it here as well, we tend to say or mention a country. We mentioned Togo, we mentioned Ghana. There was a beautiful muesli of countries that you mentioned. Okay, a whole bunch of them. But the fact is, when we are mentioning a country, we are subjecting ourselves to a colonial mindset. My great-grandfather lived at a time when a country called Nigeria did not exist. He never identified himself as a Nigerian. And many of your great-grandfathers likewise. So the question is, how did they identify themselves? And when you ask that question, and you follow it up, when you meet fellow Africans, instead of asking, which country are you from? Have the conversation to identify, what do our cultures have in common? And when you have that conversation, you realize we're all brothers and sisters. We have more in common than what separates us. Now, I'm saying this because there's a strategic reason. When I travel to different parts of the world, I do this in this very interesting Meinungsumfrage to identify whether there is a subconscious consensus within the society that I'm in. So I will ask random people the same question. Where do you see your country 10 years from now? Where do you see your country 25 years from now? Out of 10, if I get 5 responses that are more or less in the same line, that is a very strong indication that the group, the society, is moving in a particular direction. There's momentum. When we tend to ask that question on our continent, let me speak of the colonial construct that I am linked to called Nigeria. You ask 10 Nigerians, you get about 15 to 17 different answers. Because the Nigerian will say, it could be this, or it could be that, but I think it's going to be the third option. And the whole thing is scattered. As a science-based person, the overall resultant is very small compared to a small group of people or small group of individual forces moving in the same direction. The resultant force is measurable. So, having said that, I want to ask you guys to interact with us. Does anybody of you have a question that you want to mention? You've heard the story, the Werdegang, the origins, the visions. Does that tally with some of the visions you have? Do you see synergy? Can we have a mic that circulates so that people can ask questions? Is that possible, please? Thank you. And just very, very briefly introduce yourself when you ask the question, please. Yeah.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Elizabeth, and I am from Nigeria, but I have my business in Rwanda. And my question is, what do we do when we have solutions that have really checked out all the boxes of all the questions that said it was not possible, and yet we still find ourselves in this challenging box that there is still no permission for us to exist on the market? Because you found solutions in Africa. I found solutions in Africa. My solutions came from burning questions that I didn't have answers to. When we need a firm, of course we get comfortable. But we always remember where we come from, right? So now the question was, what happens? We talked about raw material exports. What happens when You put in the research, you find a solution, and yet you still don't find the space on the market. Not because you don't fit, but because of the mindset. And when you find, like me, find myself in a room like this, filled with lots of Africans with lots of vision, all kinds of visions, but there is no connection. You know, we're going to live here. Everyone is going to go home and fall back into their lives.
Well, we hope not. So in other words, that's why we're having this conversation, because you're absolutely right. Most of the panels that we have gone to in Davos becomes a marketing talk show for those sitting in the panel. And we don't know ourselves, number one. We cannot identify that we have the same needs, the same questions, the same vision. And so the whole idea is, yes, we need to know ourselves so that we can build momentum. But it's a good question, vision. How do you realize a vision? You want to say something?
Yeah, just, I have my financial point of view, but what you're saying is definitely a concept that I have in mind all the time. It's the perceived risk and the market risk. What you're saying is that you kind of killed the market risk because you made it. It was a good product, a good fit. You checked all of the boxes. All right. Then there's the perceived risk. And the perceived risk when it comes to invest in Africa, well, it's a hard thing to do, to tackle. And so my point is, together as community, as people who believe in Africa, we need to work against this perceived risk, which is not a great one, for real, and it's irrational. So the only thing I could say is that, well, keep growing, and let's be together with people with these market risk and not this perceived risk, so that we can probably as an investor, very objective. If you check all of the boxes, I would be down to invest, right? So I think that you really need to be along people. Let's get some more questions.
No more questions.
No, hold on a second. So I want to have two more questions very, very quickly. Very quickly, two more questions. There's one in the back, please. Give the mic there. The gentleman in the white. And there's another question here.
Thank you very much.
So introduce very quick. Let him speak first and then you.
Hello. Does this? Yes, it works. Hello, I'm Peter. I'm the 6th generation in my village. The 7th came from the islands outside. This is how I usually introduce myself. I come from Finland. I work in education. I've heard a lot about investments and industry and change, but very, very few discussions on education and investment in education. Globally, it's a 21 trillion deficit because of learning poverty. 21 trillion. Because we are not able to deliver education.
True. What's your question, if I may ask?
If you have one. My question is, how can we include education into this?
Very important, because that's a big, big deficit on the African continent. Absolutely. Please, my sister, what's your question? I appreciate that. It's a very pertinent. Thank you for the contribution.
Good afternoon. My name is Marie Sibueng. I'm the CEO for a business called IMU's Powerhouse in South Africa. We essentially focus on business strategy, leadership, and culture. One of the key things we look at is impact. One of the key things we look at is impact, and particularly in agriculture. And we find that technology is going to be a key enabler in scaling agriculture in Africa. And I heard you mention the concern about climate and the impact on climate. And so my remark and my question is around whether you've explored hydroponics, because hydroponics and greenhouses are going to enable or minimize that risk of climate and climate risk. So that was my question. And if yes, then I'm happy to have a conversation and see how we can take it forward.
I believe everybody knows what hydroponics is. Anybody question mark about hydroponics? Everyone's on the same page? Okay, it's agriculture not using earth, but having the plant have direct access to water. So that's in a nutshell. Good questions. 30 seconds each, and then our time's up.
Yes, so just rapidly on the hydroponics, we actually have the hydroponics plant in Ghana. where we are showcasing modern agricultural techniques in terms of how to use hydroponics to get maximum output from agriculture. But ultimately, our focus is on the waste residue. We want farmers to monetize the actual product, but we want to monetize the waste as well. So we're doing it with hydroponics.
I'd like to connect with you.
Well, maybe quickly regarding the education part, I 100% agree. We need professionals doing that. I do have the potential to be able to do that. What I can do is that soon we will have some strategies, investment strategies targeting education. But the thing is, it's really tied with governmental programs. So you really need to be close to them. And well, it's a long run, obviously a long run process. But 100% agree with you. And maybe to close my part, well, just I'm inviting you to think about how you would like to contribute to the next 20 years in the continent. 1 billion people, 3 times the population of the United States. 3 times the population of the United States in the next 20 years in Africa. Right? The challenges are huge, so I think that, and I'm inviting you to invest in Africa.
Yeah, maybe just to close, all of the challenges we face in Africa are just opportunities for all of us, right? So I want to leave you with 3 things. History shapes the road, but leadership chooses the direction. Be a leader, choose to be a leader. And distance does not lessen our responsibility. For those of us who are in the diaspora, let this distance reveal that responsibility to you and take it. Last but not least, when we build with generations in mind, infrastructure becomes legacy.
Thank you very much. On the question of education, I invite each and every one of you to learn about your culture, learn about the history, ask questions to the old senior people in the villages. There is a lot of indigenous wisdom that is inherent in the African concept. I'm going to say a statement and then I'm finished, for this panel will be ended, which is the sign of a highly developed culture is also statistically measurable in the size of the ratio of the prison population. Okay, so far so good? Now check this out. Before colonial times, in sub-Saharan Africa, we had no prisons. So the question is, what was the justice system that we had? I will leave that as a final question. Think about it, do your research, and welcome to once you have that, welcome to the future. Thank you.